A note of my might.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my character which is surrounded by madness because I'm building around Beacon of Madness. These boots you probably haven't heard of because no one uses them, and that's for a good reason. These boots are all about this skill called Embrace Madness. It is a buff that you toggle on, toggle off, similar to like an aura, but what it does is it gives you a buff from the boots, which are basically three possibilities: either Fortify, LE weakness, or LE elemental conflux, or all damage poison. This specific pair is all damage poison and 40% basically profane bloom explosions. I think this is the strongest of the three variations, but what does it come with? Well, as you see here, I have this stacking debuff that props on me. Now, each debuff, it lasts for 20 seconds, and it can stack up to 10 times. Now, what is this debuff? Well, the debuff is why people don't use this. Well, Wasting Touch, 90% reduced life and energy shield recovery rate. You can't sustain your EHP pool unless all your sustain is instant, aka gain life on hit, or like Dissolution of Flesh. 90% reduced flash charges gained, and 90% reduced flask effect. Your flasks now do nothing. Now you saw there, this actually fell off, Eroding Touch, and that's because by some miracle, getting a debuff every second, 20 times in a row, I didn't hit that debuff. Pretty rare for that to happen. I'm honestly surprised. Eroding Touch, by the way, is 60% increased damage taken. And then Paralyzing Touch, 60% reduced action speed. Now, I am giving you the total numbers because basically one stack gives you 6% reduced action speed, one stack gives you 6% increased damage taken, one stack gives you 9% reduced flask effect, 9% reduced flash charges gained, one stack gives you 9% reduced recovery rate of both life and energy shield. Point is, these are hefty downsides. They are killer. The upside, it's pretty cool. All damage can poison. It's got some powerful use cases, but how do you deal with these debuffs? Well, the short answer is it's kind of hard to deal with them all. I have some ideas for maybe dealing with all of them, but they still don't necessarily add up because there's just a lot of downside here. The way I am coping with it right now is I use Temporal Chains, Balance of Terror, which makes this action speed debuff not be a problem. This is probably actually the easiest one to deal with. You could be a Trickster, you could be a Juggernaut, you could use Calm's Roots, except you can't use Calm's Roots because Beacon of Madness is a boot slot, or you could use Balance of Terror. Action speed doesn't affect you, Temporal Chains. That is what I'm using to deal with this. But once you go away from this and you start having to be like, how do I deal with my flasks not working? Well, tough luck, buddy. Unless you care about Olros Resolve, the only flask I can think of where you actively don't want the flask to have any flask effect, you're kind of screwed. Eroding Touch, take increased damage. There's not really any move around there. You can make a character that's extra tanky and then maybe you still survive, but you're still having to compensate by investing into gear, and there's not really an easy workaround to 60% increased damage taken. And then Wasting Touch. You can't recover ES and life. Basically, it nullifies your sustain. The way around this is something like Dissolution of Flesh, and Dissolution of Flesh comes with its own problems. So, moral of the story is, the reason you don't see these pair of boots move is because somebody got a little trigger happy with the downsides of these boots. The way you can kind of sort of deal with it is you could stack debuff expiration rate, which you can get 100% from the amulet that does debuffs expire faster. Time Clasp, I think is it. You get a freaking Stasis Prism if you have 100 Divines or 50 Divines or whatever it costs. One of the rarest items in the game. Stasis Prism gives 100% debuff expiration rate. Point is, you could start stacking debuff expiration rate, and maybe these things start to fall off before they stack too highly. Or what would most likely happen is they still don't fall off fast enough. You low roll and you get 10 stacks of Eroding Touch in a row, and then you get one tapped every now and then during a map if you just low roll the wrong debuff too many times in a row. So there are issues with these debuffs. The heavy upside is you get something cool from these boots. Is it worth it? In most cases, I would say no. But what I am doing with this character is essentially, I'm turning it off. I'm turning it off and on, which is maybe what it was meant to be used for, but it's really awkward, and it's most of the reason why I'm not going to recommend this build. But basically, it takes a while to stack up, because it's 1 per second, but even when you only have a couple stacks, it's still impactful and still a hefty downside, even with only a few stacks. So I'm using Temporal Chains, and I'm turning it off every now and then. My character, what I'm doing with this is basically like a bootleg, cheap version of Original Sin, because Original Sin gives you the ability to poison with elemental skills without using the Volker's Guidance, aka the item that does 50% less poison damage. So my idea is I'm doing Hydrosphere. I'm doing some Hatred Aura effect scaling. I'm going Fizz to Cold, and then I'm doing Elemental Overload via the invocation for it that allows us to poison with Hydrosphere and have Elemental Overload. This is one of the big things you get if you can poison with elemental skills. It's 40% in terms of like a damage multiplier. Very big, very useful. And that's why, you know, Original Sin, one of the easiest good use cases is some sort of poison build with elemental skills. Not to mention the fact Temporal Chains is completely broken for scaling, and it's the reason poison builds are on top this league. Temporal Chains essentially just says, hey, you're going to get about 4 times your poison damage. It's crazy. It's honestly crazy. I would expect it would be on the top of the list of something getting nerfed next league. We'll see if it is or not. But point is, you can grab temp chains, you can really scale poison damage, and that's why I can have a character scaling poison damage with Hydrosphere and actually do some single target. Now, aside from all of that, the things that I like in this character are, for one, Hydrosphere. I gotta give it to Arrow. This is actually a pretty cool skill in terms of, I thought it was gonna be awkward and I thought I wouldn't like it, but really it's just a matter of you have to have 100% freeze chance to proc the pulsing of Hydrosphere, and that with some basically pulse frequency from the helmet chant and a little bit of quality on Hydrosphere, and it starts to pulse pretty quickly. It stacks up pretty decent hits, and it's not actually half bad of a skill. And then of course Plague Bearer, as always, Plague Bearer with Profane Bloom explosion plus the explosions from Beacon of Madness. As you saw, it's basically every monster's blowing up in purple poofs. Ultimately, if I had a character with a bit more AoE, it would just be super satisfying. Chain explodes, and well, it would get you going. Ashes of the Stars, I ultimately wouldn't recommend for this character. I ended up forcing in Flesh and Stone just because I had extra reservation efficiency. I never really fully decided what amulet I wanted to use on this build, so probably an Eternal Damnation would be the real play, but I have Ashes here because, I don't know, I don't want to keep just using Eternal Damnation for everything. Anyways, moral story, that's the idea behind the character. I have some pretty good gear. This is a awkward playstyle of turning this off every now and then when I start seeing it get too high, but it's basically curse on boss, press Withering Step to get extra wither stacks fast, and then of course left click Vortex with 100% chance to freeze. I'm proccing the freeze on my Hydrosphere, and that's why it's pulsing. That's the idea behind the character. And then all damage can poison, elemental overload. You get the idea. We're scaling curse effect, we're scaling some into Occultist, Profane Bloom, explosions from Beacon of Madness, and life is good. That's the idea behind the character. I don't really recommend the character just because the awkwardness of this, it will get you killed. It's awkward to build around, but it's just a matter of another thing I wanted to try and test out. A lot of what I do is I make characters that I don't know how they're going to turn out or what it's going to be like, simply because I want to learn. I want to be a student of learning things in PoE so I can begin to make better and better builds, because I have, I don't know, building blocks or tools I can lean back on in the future and say, okay, how does this thing work? How does this thing work? And then do stuff with it in the future, basically. So as you can see right now, the debuffs are getting pretty high, right? I have a lot of flask effect reduction. My flasks basically do nothing now. I'm going to turn off the debuff. And generally what I would want to do is I would want to turn off the debuff simply when I have like a lot of my Plague Bearer already loaded up. So that way I can turn off the debuff and then run around with Plague Bearer, and then the downtime doesn't really feel like it exists, so to speak, because Plague Bearer pretty much lasts the entirety of the downtime for that. So say I get it up to full, I would turn it off, and then I would go turn on my Plague Bearer and run around with it. That's kind of the idea I was going for. Still, I think it's a bit awkward. It can do a lot of damage, decent damage, but it's hard to tell how much is that based on the fact that I have good gear on my character, how much is that just the fact poison is kind of broken right now in terms of scaling. And we'll go ahead and see how we do on this Hydro right here. And he ran away before we could kill him, which is a bit bummer, but it's okay. Alright, and we finish him off. So that is what it looks like while mapping. That's what it looks like while bossing. It's kind of a quirky build. I don't recommend it just because of the awkwardness of Embrace Madness, but I wanted to make this video just to show you guys what I've been trying out, what I've been testing. And until next time, hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, take care, Exiles, and peace out. Have a good one.